Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two speakers today. Molly Newling has been a master gardener since 2013 and brings 50 years of gardening experience to our organization. She is a member of the Master Gardener Pruning Team, and you may have actually seen her presentation on winter pruning for woody plants, which is a very popular one. She works regularly at the help desk while maintaining her own townhouse garden, a community vegetable plot, and working to improve the grounds of her church. Joan McIntyre has been an Extension Master Gardener since 2015. She conducts public education programs on sustainable landscaping, mosquito and tick management without damaging pollinators, and best practices. She works with other master gardeners to spread information on sustainable landscaping and best practices through neighborhood social media platforms and various in-person events. She founded the Cherrydale Garden Club to bring neighbors together to share their expertise and love for gardening. And she participates in neighborhood efforts to promote trees and native plants. She also currently chairs Arlington's Climate Change, Energy and Environment Commission and volunteers for Eco Action Arlington. Molly and Joan, welcome, and we will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Welcome. Glad to see everybody here today. So we're going to talk about what you're going to be doing in the fall. Before I get started, just a quick overview for those people that are new with Cooperative Extension and Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia. We are all volunteers that are trained by Virginia Cooperative Extension and serve Arlington and Alexandria. We promote public education on environmentally sound gardening practices. We have a variety of activities. They've already mentioned the help desk, and of course we do a range of public education programs such as today. We have plant clinics that usually run in conjunction with farmers market during the growing season. And we have a number of demonstration gardens where you can actually come out and see some of the best practices and get inspired. I strongly recommend our website, mgmv.org. It has a range of super useful information, including fact sheets on a number of regionally native plants and lots of interesting articles coming out throughout the week. Brief overview of what we're going to do. To some extent, this is programs a slight misnomer for what we called, because we're actually looking to kind of tasks that you can do in the fall to start looking forward to the spring and what you can do to make things easier and kind of keep thinking of how you're changing and working your garden. But we will touch on some general cleanup tips as well as garden tool maintenance and supporting wildlife through the winter. Now is a good time to sit back and celebrate your success despite problems that you may have run into. Plants came up, they bloomed. Most of them probably thrived and did well. And also if you were growing vegetables, you certainly probably gotten something out of them. So just celebrate that. It's a good time to sit back and say the gardens take care of themselves over time. And then it's a good time then to reflect and prepare for what you want to do next year. Gardens are always changing, so we need to be kind of thinking about that. Thinking back, what were the surprises? What worked? What didn't work? What was particularly good? What problems were you developing? How did your plants do? Which ones did well? Which ones were struggling? What were your problems related to weeds, invasives, insects? How about water problems, issues? What would you like from your garden that you're not actually getting there from now? Think about what you might want to be doing starting now and working towards the spring. So first, I think is some problems is failure to thrive, plants that just haven't been doing too good, and taking a look at them. Was they getting maybe too much light, too much sun, or probably not too much rain or too much moisture? Of course, we always dealing with weather issues of we never quite getting rain at the right time in the right amounts. It's either feast or famine in some cases. Most recently, we've been pretty dry. Have there been disturbances or changes? A tree comes out, all of a sudden a shady garden becomes light. There was work that had to be done that might be disrupting your plants. And then disease or insect problems. This year, particularly in our area, crepe myrtle scale has been a huge problem. It's affected probably most of the crepe myrtle in the areas. And then are there plants that just aren't doing well and you can't quite figure out why. So there are some solutions, and some of that is first is, can you move the plant to a more suitable place where it might do better? A number of years ago, I had some azaleas that were in a fairly wet, sunny place. And when I moved them up to a drier and shadier place, they've actually done quite well there. Do a soil test. That's always the first start, especially if you're thinking about fertilizing and doing any amendments to the soil. It's best to know what you're working with. Look at options for pruning that will actually make the plant, a shrub or sometimes a tree, do a little bit better. And then there's water problems, in addition to areas that may be dry. And in my yard, it's on a hill, and the hill is a slant. So most of the water goes to one corner. So I have one side that is shady and fairly dry, and another that tends to be fairly wet. But also, clearly, we're probably more aware of things like signs of erosion, where water might stand after rain, whether you've got compaction problems, water's not really sinking in, which contributes both to the erosion as well. For those types of things, I mean, the first solution is planting, getting the right plant in the right place, plants that really meet the conditions. Also, plants are going to help with holding in the soil. They'll help with soil compaction. You can put in things like rain gardens or bioswales. Rain gardens are like a small pond positioned in a place where water would be flowing to them, and that's actually a way of capturing the water. Similar as a bioswale, as you can think of that as a slight stream, but actually designed in a way that can flow and capture the water. You can think of reducing the impervious pavements, driveways. You can put in a rain barrel too. That's also very useful of capturing some of the water and gives you a source of water that you can use to water plants without having to tap into tap water. Again, you want to think of water as being a precious resource that we really want to keep on our properties rather than letting it go into the stormwater system. And then think about having a plan. I mean, it could be a fairly general, loose plan, but something that plots out where your house is located, what things that you might have. You can identify kind of issues, but it's a way to start thinking visually of where you might want to actually change or adjust to get what you really want to get out of your yard. You can identify how you're correcting some of the problems that you're reading, identifying places for if you want to put in a rain garden or put in more trees or plants. Thinking about too is how you want to use your yard. Especially since the pandemic, I think we've all appreciated the outdoors a lot better. So kind of think, and especially over time, where areas that you can actually recreate, enjoy the outside, creating maybe little rooms in different areas. Can you add more trees and shrubs? Trees and shrubs and any kind of native plants, particularly beneficial to the environment. It creates habitat. It helps to some extent absorb some carbon and pollutants. It'll help slow storm water, so that there's huge advantages of getting trees and shrubs in your yard where you have room. The alternate is reducing your lawn size. Essentially, lawn is a impervious surface to some extent. It does have some purposes for recreational. It's one of the few plants that you can spend a lot of time walking over, and it won't be too destroyed, but kind of thinking about what the purpose is. And I do believe we have on our website a program that deals particularly with lawn alternatives that you can look into for more detail. And then think about where you can put especially trees and other plantings in order to actually help conserve energy. If you position trees on the southeast, southwest sides of your home, it's going to shade it. Any shading of air conditioning units will help reduce the work that the air conditioner has to do during the heat. And then again, would you like a pollinator garden? Would you like vegetable gardens? And that gets into what you want to do and what the purpose is of your plan. One thing you might look at is on September 22nd, the Washington Post actually had a pretty good article about how you can plan a design. So give kind of a good ideas of how you can gradually transform your yard into something that would be more suitable for climate and suitable for supporting habitat and dealing with some of the other issues that we're facing. So lots of ideas out there. Soil test is always a particular, especially in those areas where you saw your plants may not have done well. It will give you basic information you need about the nutrients in the soil, whether you need to add anything. It can also tell you what the organic content is, which is very important. Soils with higher organic content are more likely to hold water. They support the biome, the fungi and the bacteria that are so essential for healthy soils. You can do it every 3 years. In Virginia, that can be done through Virginia Tech. If you're not in Arlington, Alexandria, you can check your cooperative extension as to where you can get the soil test kits to send in. Otherwise, if you're outside of the state, check with the local cooperative extension. But really, you should be doing a soil test before you add any fertilizers, any amendments to the soil to make sure that you're actually doing the right thing. Too much of fertilizer is actually more damaging. It's just more likely to be run off into the watershed and contribute to water pollution. Think carefully about what you're doing. And also it helps you make choices. Because you've got highly acidic soils, there's a lot of plants that like acidity, like azaleas or blueberries. So again, right plant, right place in terms of thinking about the nutrient and the soil conditions. So fall is actually your best time for planting. It's going to give trees and shrubs a time to really get established while the weather's cooling off, while you're usually getting a lot more moisture than you get, say, in the height of the summer. So while we tend to think of the garden has died for the winter, it really hasn't. It's just gone dormant. But there's a lot going on under the soil. The plants are getting established. So again, putting things in the fall gives them the fall into the spring for the best conditions for really to get that root structure and get the plant established before you hit more of the stress of summertime. Again, you can also plant or divide perennials and think about spring ephemerals. What would you like? Virginia bluebells are a nice plant. And there's a number of other good ephemerals that give you that early spring beauty. So some tips on planting. I mean, the key thing to keep in mind is that you have to plan for what the trees, shrubs are going to be at maturity, and make sure that you allow adequate spacing from that. And with trees, it's important to remember that their tree roots will go much further beyond just the tree canopy itself. So you want to make sure that there's plenty of room for the tree roots to spread out. So general guidance is if you're talking about a large canopy tree of over 50 feet, one at about 20 feet or so from a building. Medium trees can go a little bit closer at 15, and then the smaller trees up to about 25 feet, maybe about 8 feet. For shrubs, the one thing you want to think about is what's the mature size of the shrub going to be, making sure that you're allowing, especially when it's a foundation plant, that you're allowing for at least a foot or more beyond what the spread is going to be between that and the foundation. That actually allows for a better insulating effect. And also, if you need to get back there, it makes it a little bit easier if you don't have it right up against the foundation. That's going to be very specific to each shrub that you're dealing with. Other things to keep in mind is utility lines, where especially the overhead lines. You obviously don't want to put a canopy tree right under the utility lines, because the utility company will actually come and kind of pretty much cut down and top off the trees, and that's not good for the trees. Of course, when you're planting anything, especially digging fairly deeply, go ahead and call Miss Utility and find out where the utility lines are coming. And think about your neighbors, remember that they can't actually cut and prune anything that on their side of the property line. Hopefully your neighbors will actually share many of your same priorities and values when it comes to your landscaping, but just keep in mind of that particular factor as well. So in terms of planting, a couple of the key rules on planting, regardless of what type of tree or what kind of container comes in, is that you always want to plant where the trunk flare, which is actually where the trunk of the tree and the roots are above the soil line. If you put it too deep, it's going to cut off access to air, and that will mean that the tree would not likely live as long as it should, and it will struggle. The other thing is not to amend the soil. It sounds counterintuitive, but you don't want to add mulch. You don't want to add fertilizers. You want to actually put back the soil that you dug out, so that basically the trees dealing with the conditions both within the hole and broader are pretty much the same, which will make it easier for the roots to get established. Plants are likely to come in 3 different sizes. One would be bare root, which is essentially no dirt around it, just the roots. So that way you can just get the depth of the hole and spread the roots around a little bit, probably easiest. This is really going to be fairly small trees and shrubs. Smaller, it gets better Containers, we really want to be careful about, and if you can inspect them before you buy them in many cases, and I suspect that this time of year in particular, they often come with a fairly thick, dense root ball with the roots starting to encircle around them, and so that buy them that doesn't have that really pot-bound root structure. Otherwise, cut off or loosen at the very bottom of the containers, getting those roots, trying to get off as much of the soil as you can. But you want to kind of loosen those roots so that they will start to grow out, make it easier for them to get established, to get the roots out so they can get the water. Otherwise, what you can often run into, and I certainly have had a number of cases, is that plants don't thrive, and whenever it stops raining, they lose access to any water pretty quickly. And then for larger plantings, particularly trees, you get it root bound where they're tied with metal and burlap. Make sure you take off all of the burlap and remove it. Any nails, any ropes, any metal, all should come out. Again, trying to loosen a little bit. This is usually a big job because we're really talking about a relatively large plant. Get the root ball as free as possible. Once you finish planting, water very deeply, take out the tags. If you're putting in guide supports, make sure that you're keeping track of them. They shouldn't be on the tree for any longer than a year. And then for general planting tips, perennials, it's almost the opposite, is you can think about crowding and putting them a little closer together just so that they will grow quicker and start to crowd out the weeds. So general guidelines is plugs can be 8 to 10 inches, quartz size about 12 inches, and pots 14 inches. Think about what the final size is going to be. Looking at the root ball and trying to gently loosen any roots, especially where they've become compacted. And in general, and this actually applies to trees and shrubs as well as any plants, is the smaller the better is often the best, because there's less disruption to the root, less stress on the trees in terms of having a lot of growth area to provide nutrients and water to, so they'll have a much better chance of getting established and surviving. If you're looking for attracting pollinators, the general rule is try to think about 3x3 areas of massings, because pollinators tend to like to go to the same plant from one plant to the next. So if they're all together, that makes it much easier. Think about what you know about the growth of the plants, and for some things that can be fairly widespreading in the mint family, for example, you might want to think about where you can place them in a way that there'll be a natural barrier, either hardscapes or even in some cases I've known people, for mints in particular, is just bury them in the container itself so that it kind of stay where they are as opposed to taking over everything else. You work with your garden, you get to know what plants, how they perform in your own garden. Once you've got a somewhat established garden, in my case, I've got areas where some plants seem to be taking over or kind of more predominant than I would like. And there's always options to change and add. So, I've got in my area, it's depending on the time of year, I've got things like golden Alexandra, which are fairly aggressive and take over and look very nice in the spring. Well, a month or so ago, it was the black-eyed Susan. We kind of had a sea of that. And right now it's the New England asters that have been seeding and kind of moving their way down the bed. So I've got shrubs in there that I'm trying to cultivate, and as they start to grow, I want to kind of make sure they have room and you can actually see them and they're not covered. So moving some plants to make them a bit more visible. Again, with some of my beds, I'm thinking I'll put in maybe another canopy tree and some shrubs and kind of move things around there. Actually, I've got things like asparagus that surprisingly seeds itself fairly easily around the yard. So I'll be digging some of those things up. If you're dealing with invasives and weeds and vines, that is often just a perennial issue. It seems that every time I blink, the porcelain berry, and now I've got trumpet flower, which is a nice native plant, but it is pretty aggressive. So it's not something you necessarily want, except in very limited cases, and it seeds pretty easily. Lots of weeds and invasives, English ivy, garlic mustard, any of those types of things that really don't add anything from an environmental or wildlife benefit is probably ones that you want to take to, and especially with the vines where they tend to get all over the shrubs and that is get those out. And then thin, decide where you want to kind of thin and dig up some of the plants that may have been going too crazy. Or earlier this year, I dug out a lot of northern sea oats, which had taken over an area. It says there is such a thing as being too happy in an area. This plant actually is more controllable when it's drier and when it's shadier than in the area that I had it in, where it was fairly sunny and got plenty of moisture. And in that case too, I had an opportunity to observe things like the goldenrod, and I've got some Siberian irises that kind of hold their own against this plant. So, as you notice, plants that are other aggressives, they're good combinations to go with plants as you're trying to kind of fill gaps and get some variety in your yard, not being dominated by any one particular one. You start to move plants around again, as you've noticed, these plants do well, move them into similar conditions, move them to fill where you have gaps is you want to cover soil. I mean, one of my goals and one of the goals I recommend is actually you want to cover your soil with living matter as much as possible. That's the way it grows in nature, and that's a little less work for you, less having to do mulching and weeding if you get things covered with plants that you actually want to grow. And then the other thing is to just making peace with some volunteers. A lot of this is striking a balance between what you want and what your plants want. So look for where does it make sense just to leave plants and let them grow where they've seeded if they're adding value. One thing that I've encouraged or let go is the violets. This is a nice native plant. It's fairly low. It makes a good ground cover. It seeds pretty profusely, easily dug out if I want to get at it. It doesn't really quite go well in my strawberry beds. I'd rather have strawberries than violets, but it actually then can serve as a bit of a border to keeping the strawberries more or less in their place. Believe it or not, you may actually have too many strawberries. And then, whatever you dig out, you can share with your friends and neighbors, as well as a good way to share the wealth and encourage people to plant, especially native plants and plants that are really adding value. And usually I find it's very easy to give things away to neighbors that everybody's looking for some free plants. And then the other thing thinking about is starting to prepare beds for new plantings. There's a couple of strategies you can use. One strategy, if you're just trying to kill lawn, is just put cardboard down and then put a couple of layers, a couple of inches of mulch on top of it. And the cardboard and the mulch will break down over the course of the year, and you can plant on it in spring. You do want to be pretty careful is don't put it around mature trees or where you've already got some extensive planting, because it might actually reduce the amount of water that's actually getting down to the roots of trees and shrubs. So, but in areas where you're just trying to kill grass, cardboard usually tends to be mostly breaking down in the spring so that you can plant into it. The other thing you could do is instead of 2 or 3 inches of mulch, go ahead and put 6 to 8 inches of mulch. A little bit less work, but it'll serve the same purpose of smothering the grass and the other stuff that you have going on, and that you can start going ahead and planting in the spring. So I'll stop now for any questions.
So we have 2 questions so far. The first one is, does the don't amend the soil rule apply to planting perennials as it does to the trees and shrubs?
Yeah, I would think so. If you're going to amend the soil, you do it first is kind of understanding what conditions are and whether it needs any fertilizer. If you're dealing with compacted land areas, if you're kind of a one-time working mulch into the areas, again, any fertilizers in that should actually require a soil test to see whether it's actually necessary. Some people will put a mycorrhizome. I don't know how strong the research is on that in terms of how effective that is. But again, as you add mulch in, that over time will help build the organic compost as well as the bacterial and the fungal growth that is so critical to healthy plants.
Could you also talk a little bit about the rationale for not adding mulch?
Well, one of the issues is that when you're digging a hole and you've got a certain soil structure and conditions outside of the hole based on the soil, and then if you're adding things, you're actually changing the soil structure right around the plant. So it in some sense becomes a bowl, and it actually will hold water. And it will also make it a little harder for the roots to penetrate through the new soil. But it actually, again, because it creates two different kind of soil structures, the way the water moves through the soil, basically you'll get root rot and you get too much because the water doesn't easily absorb into the soil.
Okay.
What does
Someone else who likes some violets wanted to know what you think about strawberries as a ground cover.
Yeah,
Wild
and I actually,
strawberries.
have a fairly wide area that is strawberries. It's asparagus mixed in with it.
What
So they
about
do make
wild
a very-
strawberries?
There is a native strawberry, which is good. I would recommend there is a more of a weed that is in the strawberry family, and that I usually pull out. It doesn't really do much benefit to me. It's more of a weed. So again, I think some of this is deciding your priorities. What do you want to concentrate and focus on first? But what looks like a strawberry can push out some of the other plants. Again, my goal on weeding is to try to encourage the plants that I want.
Another question on violets. Can they be cut back and encouraged to reflower and releaf?
They're very low to the ground anyway. So they'll bloom once and they'll seed. And that's pretty much their cycle.
Okay. The final question for this section, someone has a small area with lavender that they put small white rocks around it, which now has lots of weeds. Is there any recommended way to clean this area without having to remove all the rocks?
You can try to pull it. It's just, the rocks are not necessarily a good way of mulching. Because once you do get these weeds, it's kind of hard, and we tend not to recommend that you use any kind of pesticide because of the implications it has to the soil and might have to wildlife and the soil health. Honestly, that tend to recommend that you're using organic materials for mulching is a way of and that was control weeds probably as well as doing that, because again, once you have that issue, it becomes somewhat problematic of how to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And the soil, the mulch will constantly be working into the soil and help improve the health of the soil.
Okay, thank you. We can move on, I think.
Okay, so we'll talk about some garden cleanup tasks. Less is better. And starting with leaving the leaves. If you let the leaves stay where they planned, they're going to break down into the soil. That's how it works with Mother Nature. It'll provide mulch to the soil, less work for you in terms of having to rake out, especially in your garden beds. A key thing is that it actually protects insects. There's a whole range of insects, and you can kind of think of things like lightning bugs will overwinter in the leaf litter. And therefore, if you remove a lot of this leaf litter, you're removing a lot of the habitat for these insects. And you probably also will be removing a lot of the insects as well in whatever form that they overwinter. Insects are extremely critical to our whole cycle of life. They do a lot of benefits in terms of soil enhancement, helping break down compost, but they provide food for lots of other insects, for birds, other things. You take those away, and then you also deprive, particularly we're seeing this in population drops of birds where they can't find enough insects, especially caterpillars, to feed their young. And those caterpillars tend to want to live on native plants. This is pretty crucial. You can leave them where they fall. Obviously, too many in on the lawn is going to tend to smother the lawn. So you may want to, use your mower or mulching mower just to mulch the leaves, and that will just add that compost to the soil, or rake them into the beds. You can also put them in your compost pile. I tend to cut up and mulch some of the leaves to make them smaller. If I'm putting in compost, I do find if you put full-size leaves, it takes a long time for them to actually decompose if they're in a pile. That minimizes the amount of work that you have to do. It's adding benefits to your garden by working with Mother Nature rather than breaking everything out and then putting in more organic materials and mulch in your yard. Similarly, if you've got native perennials, you want to hold back on cutting back things, especially things like the coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, any grasses that might have seed heads. They can be attractive. They'll add some winter interest, but as importantly, they do find food for birds that overwinter in the area. And in some cases, the insects actually overwinter in stalks and debris of plants. So again, kind of doing more what Mother Nature is, you're helping to maintain natural cycles that go on. And even when you do cut back the native plants in the spring is cutting them back with 12 to 18-inch stalks left in some areas where insects may be overwintering or leaving their larvae in those plants over the coming years. Less work for you, better for the environment, better for the insects. Pruning, again, fall is pretty much a bad time for pruning. You can always prune out any dead growth on your plants, but otherwise for deciduous trees, you definitely want to wait until you're into the winter time and it's fairly cold, usually January through March before they start leafing out. When you're pruning earlier, it kind of puts added stress to a plant that's also trying to grow at the same time. You do need to be careful with shrubs. The general rule is shrubs that will flower in the spring based on this year's growth, you would prune after they have flowered. In the resource package we handed out, there is a calendar that will tell you when you should be pruning shrubs to know the best time. Evergreens are such that you can prune most any time, except fall is probably the only time that it's not recommended. Pruning is actually stimulating the plant to grow. So you'll have a lot of new growth on evergreens that may not be hardened enough to tolerate freezes. So that new growth will get killed off. Better to wait to prune any evergreens after that. If you've got vegetable gardens, bring in even green tomatoes as frost is approaching. Any of your houseplants that have been outside for the summer need to come in before it gets too cold. And one thing in terms of actually cutting back plants that have had a lot of disease, I have peonies that almost always get some form of foliar disease. And so I will cut those back in the fall and then discard those and not put them in the compost. So you do want to clean up around where you've had any problems with disease or insects, cut back and remove the debris, and that could probably go in organic compost collection of the county, because they will compost at a much higher rate that will kill off insects as well as bacteria and fungi. You can think about deadheading some perennials that especially tend to overseed heavily. I just cut the seed heads off of a lot of the garlic chives I have in my yard because they do tend to seed pretty much. And I've been trying to control a little bit of the rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susans. They seed pretty prolifically. The other thing to think about some of that is that's a good way of spreading plants. So if you'd like to get some established somewhere else, cut off the seed heads and drop them in an area that you'd want to like to see if they'll take root there. Just a reminder, in the Northern Virginia area where we are, we're usually talking about late October, early November as likely dates for the first fall freeze, although it varies widely, given changing temperatures and even erratic weathers. Keep an eye on the forecast, and when temperatures look like they're going to be dropping below 40 degrees, make sure you're bringing in those sensitive plants. If it's pretty early in the season, you can put in some sort of covering that will help protect them. And then finally, anything that isn't covered naturally by what you have growing, you want to make sure your soil is covered with mulch. Covering the soil is particularly important to helping reduce erosion, helping to prevent soil compaction and leaching of any minerals. It also will help suppress some of the winter annual weeds and perennial weeds. The organic matter improves the soil health, and then it actually adds some insulation, so it will keep the ground temperature a little bit more evening over the winter and keep plants from heaving as you go through repeated freezing and thawing cycles. Best mulch is actually to have plants and leaf litter that cover the area, but you can put mulch or compost. Leaf mulch works very nicely for me. And then cover crops is a good option for vegetable gardens. And also maybe if you've got any beds that you're getting established, you haven't planted anything yet, if you put a cover crop and then cut it back before it goes to seed, work that into the soil. It's a way of protecting the soil and then giving it enrichment of additional organic materials. One thing on mulching and covering your soils, you might want to look for a couple of areas that you actually leave bare. There are a number of ground nesting bees, native bees, again, very important for pollination. Do think about giving them a little bit room of bare soil for those types of nesting. So I'll stop here for questions.
Yes, Joan, we have a bunch of questions. The first one is, do the rules for pruning apply to fruit trees?
You want me to answer that, Joan?
Yeah, Molly is much more of our expert on pruning, so.
Fruit trees are probably the 300 level class of pruning. And we do, I think, have a program on that. But you would probably still do that in the spring. You have to wait to prune woody plants until they're really dormant. And around our area, in Northern Virginia, that usually isn't until late December and into very early March. So that's when you would do your major pruning for shape and for fruit production, if that's what you're doing. This is one of the few times when we say it's okay to prune in the spring for a plant that blooms in the spring, because you're actually trying to reduce the size of the top growth of the tree in order to reduce the number of flowers and therefore fruit, because otherwise the tree will actually try to produce more fruit than it can actually sustain. And also you want to get sunlight and air through the tree structure generally for good healthy fruit. So that's a little bit more technical than general garden pruning.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how to remove and dig out Jerusalem artichokes to make sure they're entirely gone?
I expect you have to do that repeatedly. My neighbor's got them growing in her yard and they keep coming back. So it's just kind of a persistence on that.
Overwintering dahlias, is it possible?
I suspect it may have to do with where they've been located. I mean, if it's a part of the area, say against a southern facing foundation with a lot of mulch on top of it, you might have some luck in getting them to overwinter where they are. A heavy frost and a lot of cold is going to kill them and any other type of bulbs that really are more tropical plants. Otherwise, I'd dig them up and store them for the winter and replant, but it's that extra effort. Native plants that are more attuned to living in this area are kind of a long run if you're trying to reduce the amount of work you're doing.
Okay, same question for canna lilies.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. Now,
Okay.
years and years ago, I had canna lilies that came back several years in a row, and then we got a winter with a hard freeze and they didn't work. So it's pretty hit or miss. Occasionally, I've even had canna lilies show up voluntarily. I don't know where they come from, but they might be there for a year or so, but they're not going to do well if it's pretty cold.
Another question, someone planted foxglove for pollinators and now it's gone crazy. Should they get rid of it since it's toxic, or where is it safe to move it with regards to vegetables, chickens, and birds?
Foxglove is a biennial, so it will grow, vegetation one year and then flower the next. I don't think of them as being that toxic. I mean, if humans eat it, yes, that is a problem, but I don't think they're toxic to birds. I'm not sure about chickens. So I don't think that's a problem. It really is a question of whether you want a monoculture of foxgloves in that area, in which case now is the time, if you've got little seedlings, now's the time to pull them up and thin them out to the that you want to have next year.
Do you guys have recommendations for a low maintenance cover crop for someone who's not planting fall or winter vegetables?
It's getting a little late for that, but rye is good. I think that's one of the ones you can plant the latest.
I tend to prefer a cover crop that's a mix. Beeches, clover, just so you get a kind of, especially the clover and the beech are nitrogen fixing.
Mhm.
Timing is everything.
Turn it all over early in the season.
Okay. And finally, someone has 2 grapevines that extend about 30 feet. How and when should they be pruned?
I know there's publications on this from Virginia Tech. The best thing would be to check with the help desk and they can send you specific information.
Okay.
So now we're jumping over to a whole new topic and talking about the tools that you're using to make your garden beautiful and what you can do to make them last longer and to work better for you. So obviously tools will last longer when they're well cared for. And especially with your cutting tools, your pruners and your shovels. They will work better if they're sharp. So that's something we need to do all the time. Also, cleaning them and disinfecting them helps to prevent the spread of diseases. This is really important when you're dealing with cutting back something that you suspect has any kind of disease. And they're safer when they're working properly, and they're easier to use. So these are all good reasons to keep your tools in good shape. This is your toolkit, basic toolkit here displayed. So you've got some kind of coarse steel wool or wire and a brush and claws just to get off the rust and the big pieces of dirt that you've accumulated over the season. You need a file, either a whetstone, or you can see in the foreground, there's a file with a handle. It's actually a diamond file that folds up, so very neatly fits into your toolkit and is a very handy way of sharpening, especially smaller items. You'll need boiled linseed oil or turpentine if you've got wooden handles that you need to keep in good shape. Rubbing alcohol for disinfecting, 70% rubbing alcohol, that's the best. Do not use Clorox, it is too harsh and will corrode your expensive shears and loppers. So stick with either alcohol or possibly Lysol. They will do the job. Lightweight oil like WD-40 or spray or other types of light oil like sewing machine oil to put on your tools once you've cleaned them to keep the rest off. A vise or a clamp is very handy if you're working on a big item and you don't have somebody else to hold it for you. And of course, to protect you, safety glasses and work gloves. You need to gather all of those materials before you get going. All right, so first you have to get things cleaned off. Spray your item with a good strong spray from a hose or scrape it with a wire brush to make sure that all the dirt and all the rust that you could possibly get off is gone, and then rub it with steel wool to get it right down to the bare metal. If you've been working with trees with a lot of sap, evergreens, especially with your pruners, you can get that off with Murphy's oil soap, or even the WD-40 sometimes will help remove that. So you want to get that stickiness all off. And then if you're working with a chemical sprayer, those big pump sprayers, you're going to need to flush them out with water, which is quite a job, which is why I don't use those kinds of things. Okay, this is a little video on how to sharpen your tools once you've gotten them cleaned off. So first you're cleaning off any residue of tree sap with the steel wool and the Goo Gone, and then cleaning with a steel brush to wire brush to make sure they're completely clean and ready for the sharpening. And then finally disinfecting with alcohol, just putting it into a container and dipping your pruners in. Okay, now you're starting. You see the beveled edge on the larger blade? That is where you are going to be sharpening. You hold your sharpener at the same angle as that edge and push it along. And then finally, oiling to prevent rust. On this kind of pruner, you only sharpen one blade. If the blade is flat, you don't sharpen it, only the beveled one. Okay, now we're going on to other kinds of tools, the digging tools that you use frequently in your garden. So first you're going to wash it off, make sure it's completely clean of any kind of dirt. And then you go again with a wire brush or the steel wool to get it clean. Clean it, wiping it dry. And there's your beveled edge again. You check it for nicks, and then you've got your sharpener, and you again hold it at that angle, same angle as the beveled edge, and run it along. It's about 45 degrees. And it should be shiny by the time you're done, right in that spot. And now, again, protecting it with the oil for the winter. Okay, now this is a little bit more detail on the sharpening. You have to look at your tools and see how many beveled edge each one has. The hand pruners tend to have only one. There's the sharp edge that runs against a dull edge, so you only sharpen the one edge that is angled. With loppers, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just a larger tool of the same style. Grass shears, shovels, and hoes, again, only have one cutting edge. When you get down to a hay fork, and I don't know how many of you use hay forks, but perhaps you use a spading fork, they have multiple tines and they each have to be sharpened individually. So that will take you a little bit more time. And also with axes, you're going to be sharpening both sides of that axe blade. Now, saws are tricky because they've got multiple little points and they each have to be sharpened. The easiest thing to do with those is to take them to a hardware store or a place that will actually sharpen them for you, or simply with pruning saws, you often can just replace the blade, and that's actually simpler and just as cost effective. Good idea that get everything fixed now before you put it away, and then when you get it out in the spring, everything's ready to go. So with hoses, definitely repair any kind of leaks, and that usually means cutting out the damaged part and then reattaching with a hose repair kit that you can get in most hardware and big box stores. Anything that's loose on any of your tools needs to be tightened up, made firm. And if wood handles are getting really split and weak, then sometimes you can buy them a new handle in the store. Those are getting a little bit more difficult to find, but test all your stuff and make sure it's in good firm condition. Okay, if you do have wood handles and you want to keep them in good shape, you can sand them down if they've gotten banged around or nicked, and make sure they're smooth. That's good for your hands as well. Wipe them with a rag that has got either linseed oil or turpentine to keep the wood from drying out and keep it in good shape, and put rust inhibitor like light oil on any surfaces on the blade where you might have rust. And make sure you've also lubricate your pruners where they pivot on that screw with something to make sure that they're operating smoothly and comfortably for your hand. And then the sanitizing again, either soaking for 30 seconds in the rubbing alcohol, not using bleach or pine solvent. And this kind of procedure, if you're pruning something that is diseased, you should be doing it between every cut, so you're not spreading the disease into the healthy part of the plant. Now you need to put everything away. Make sure wherever you're putting them is dry, so they're not being exposed to water and especially freezing during the winter time. Drain your hoses, and if possible, bring them under cover so that they won't get water inside them again and then expand and freeze. Soaker hoses do drain themselves. You can leave them outside if it's not convenient to store them and to put them all down again next spring. Rain barrels definitely have to be emptied, because otherwise you will split your barrel with a freezing event. It's better to store them inside if you can, but you can turn them upside down outside if you have to, if you don't have any kind of a garage or someplace or a shed to put them in. And definitely move any terracotta pots inside. Plastic pots will stay outside. There are some terracotta pots that are conditioned and will take freezing and thawing, but if you are not sure, empty them and bring them inside. Otherwise, you will split your pots. Power equipment, we're not giving you detailed information on, but what you need to do is follow your owner's manual, or take, in the case of especially mowers, them to a shop that will drain them for gasoline and clean them and get them ready for next spring. So you have to go through all these steps again. If you're working yourself on anything with a sharp blade and a motor, make sure you take out either the spark plug or disable it or the battery, so that you're not inadvertently turning it on when you're working on it. That's exceedingly dangerous. But otherwise, you need to go through this whole sharpen the blades on your blowers and your cutting tools, changing the oil, charging the battery, taking out the fuel or putting a fuel stabilizer in if it's a gas operated item. You tune them up now, they'll work much better in the spring. So here are your safety equipment, your glasses and your gloves, and a clamp to hold things to be sharpened if you don't have help or if it's large. Make sure you follow directions on any products that can be dangerous. They can either be flammable or poisonous. So read the instructions and use them as they recommend. If you do use rags that are soaked in either linseed oil or turpentine, this is considered hazardous waste, and they can spontaneously combust by sitting in a pile together. Either put them in a metal can outside or take them to the hazardous waste disposal place for your county, because you don't want those sitting around your house. They could have very dangerous consequences. Take care of yourself, take care of your tools, and you will be doing happy gardening. That's the bottom line here. We all need to feel taken care of.
One questioner has pruners that stay shut or stuck after she uses them to make a cut. What is the solution to this?
Make sure you get them completely clean and clean them with steel wool and some kind of goop remover, either oil or that gugong product. It may be that they're sticking either because of rust or because of some residue from the plant. So you really ideally would clean your pruners after every pruning session so that doesn't happen.
Is there anything that might need to be done to the spring?
Well, if it's spring operated, that is possible. Sometimes you can take the whole thing apart. There's a big screw that holds the two pieces together. Depends on how clever you are with mechanical stuff and whether you have the tools to do that.
Hoping you don't mind, there are a couple of questions from before. Someone has pokeweed growing in their garden and they have mixed feelings about it. They know it's good for some birds and other creatures, but want to know how you feel about keeping it or getting rid of it.
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings as well, because it is a nice native plant. And I think even some people say it has medicinal uses, although it can be toxic too. So you got to know what you're doing. But, if it's in an out of way place, and if you're willing to kind of keep an eye out and get rid of the seedlings as they pop up, again, they do pop up pretty profusely and pretty much throughout the area. If it's an out of way place and blends in with the area, sure, go ahead and let some of it grow.
Right. It depends whether you have children, whether you have pets, that would be an attractive hazard to. Those are the kind of factors. How big your yard is, whether you can let it persist in an out of the way place that you think is safe. I would say safety first.
And finally, someone has periwinkle or vinca minor taking over the ground around their shrubs and flowers. Is there an easy solution to this?
Well, I would call it easy. It depends on how big a space and how much energy you have, but that's not a native, and it's been very, very widely used as a ground cover, but it's not a native, so it doesn't support any wildlife. It does tend to spread into wild areas, and then it's actually then an invasive. So if you can, you have to dig it out or pull it out to get rid of it, really. Once you do that, there are many, many native ground covers that you could put in its place that would support wildlife and pollinators. So
the same applies to English ivy. The one caveat to be at least more careful about is if it's on a hillside, because you want to kind of do it in a way of pulling out at the same time of getting in additional plants, especially say good native plants that might spread pretty quickly. Right. So that you limit the amount of erosion that you might have.
Yes, well, you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it in stages and start planting the native stuff while you still have some vinca there to hold the ground. I know English ivy encourages mosquitoes because it holds so much moisture. I didn't realize vinca does it too. That was interesting from one of our participants here.
Okay, that's great. We can go on. Thank you.
All right, so now we've taken care of our plants. We've put all of our tools away, and now we're looking forward to hopefully enjoying the winter. And part of enjoying the winter is enjoying the wildlife that is still around. Animals and birds need water through the winter. They actually need water more than I think they need artificial feeding. So if you can possibly provide them water, either by putting out water every day, or if you can put a little heating system in your bird bath, then that would be much appreciated by your local wildlife. Waiting until spring, as Joan has already said, to cut back the native perennials is a great way, especially a lot of native bees lay their eggs into the stems of native perennials, which are actually hollow. So if you can leave those, as long as you can stand it, if your HOA says, no, you have to clean everything up, maybe you can cut them, but leave them outside so that the eggs still have a chance to hatch later in the spring and develop. Leave the seed heads as much as you can from the native flowers. We talked about this a little bit. Coneflowers, Rudbeckia, native grasses, Coreopsis, all are food for birds and little mammals during the winter time. And the berries. The berries are very important. So this is winter berry holly, and it's a beautiful plant. And also the birds will be very happy to eat those berries. If you are putting out feeders, make sure that they're located so that cats can't easily get at the birds. 10 to 12 feet from the shrub so that the cats can't lurk and jump on the birds as they're feeding. That's the major consideration. And then make sure you get a really good mix of seed. Some of the cheaper seeds mixes are not particularly nutritious. And then fatty things such as suet or peanut butter are great for the birds to give them energy during the winter when it's so cold. And if you are using a feeder, make sure you clean it very regularly. I would say at least once a week. We had a lot of incidences of birds getting some kind, I think it was some kind of funguses and eye diseases and going blind last year. And we were told to take feeders down because they felt that that was the source of the infection. So be really careful about your sanitation. I think you all should have received a fact sheet with a lot of links to other publications and other information. These are just some other sources, especially our website has all the native plant fact sheets for alternatives to invasives and plants that don't help support wildlife. And then you can sit back and enjoy the winter. And any final questions?
There were a couple. What's the best way to clean your bird feeders?
I haven't had a bird feeder for quite some while, but you have to really scrub it down. Take it apart as much as you can. So look into that when you purchase one. Make sure that all the seed debris, sometimes if it gets wet, they kind of send some mold and clump together, get all of that out. So you're really scrubbing it. Disinfecting, I would use alcohol if you're going to disinfect. But that probably would be a good idea, especially with the disease issue we had last winter.
A lot of those bird feeders are not made terribly well for cleaning. Getting a good strong hose can knock off a lot of the bird seed that may have stuck there. Wash with soap and water when you can. And then research as you're buying bird feeders and see what people say about, especially how easy it is to clean.
Yeah, the wooden ones I would think would be really hard to disinfect. I would think the metal and glass ones would be a lot easier to actually scrub and feel that you've gotten it clean.
And finally, I know there's some debate on whether it's a good idea to feed the birds. Do you feel like reviewing that? I
have seen arguments on both sides. Some people feel that if you plant for wildlife and for birds, and you plant a lot of grasses with seeds, a lot of plants that have seeds, shrubs that have berries, that you are doing as good as having a feeder. The feeders tends to concentrate the birds into one area, which also might make them more prone to cat predation, especially if you have feral cats in your area. So I'm not sure that the jury's really in on that issue, but.
Yeah, and the other thing is birds tend to congregate closer together as well, which would spread disease.
Right.
So things to keep in mind. But I think pretty much our environments are fairly degraded, so there aren't necessarily the number of sources for foods as we'd like to have naturally. But the other thing is that it actually gets people more engaged in nature, being able to see it right outside your window. you're not engaged in nature, if you're not caught up in what actually is out there, you're less likely to care. So I think that tends to be kind of an underlying argument of why you should be feeding the birds, is
Right.
that it helps kind of instill a love of nature.
There are certain activities that are sort of entry points into people's concern about the monarchs has spread over into planting native plants in general, which is all good. And I think bird watching is another entry point for people who otherwise would not be interested in natural activity or the whole cycle of natural life. So that's good.
Yeah, those are good points. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you both. This was a wonderful presentation. I think we're all looking forward now to heading out to our gardens and putting them to bed. And we have lots of good advice to guide us. So we thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Pleasure.
All
Yeah.
right.